verse 23 through 39, is one of these ones that you can kind of read past. It's part of that scripture where you sleep reading, it's on my chart, I got to get it done so that I do my daily devotion. And this little 3 sentences says so much. And I'll read it. Now, while he, Jesus, was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many people saw the miraculous signs he was doing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all men. He did not need man's testimony about him, for he knew what was in a man. So what we see in this coming Messiah was somebody who was not so concerned about which way the political wind was blowing. What was the popular opinion of the group of people? He was solidly and decidedly always thinking, how do I please the Father? How do I help fulfill his purposes? And that too should be our concern. Because we find if we walk in that path, that's the one place where we're safe. Which gets back to you're not going to make everybody happy. But if you know you're getting a pat on the head, well done, good and faithful servant, one of the things we find is the popular opinion doesn't really matter that much. When you know you're approved by God, when you know you're pleasing the Father, when you've come to him and he knows you, when you know him, it seems that other things tend to go away. And I firmly believe this is the number one stumbling block for believers in congregations, denominations, whatever it may be, for carrying out Jesus' work. This is it. Trying to please men and women. Beyond the shadow of a doubt, that is the fundamental thing we worry about. How will we be seen? And we must remember the one we've pledged when we've come to Christ to please is him. We've walked out of the world. And we must remember that pat on the head from him is what we need. We must avoid that being a man or woman pleaser. It's really a recipe for disaster. I think any of us have been in any type of a leadership or a club or a group, we find that when we attempt to please everybody, we don't make anybody happy, do we? Well, there's got to be an amen on that. I mean, it's an attempt to please everybody, but in doing that, we quite often neglect pleasing the Father, don't we? How many times do we do that in this attempt to keep everybody happy, the very one we pledge to please, we forget about? And then we wonder why relationships crumble. We wonder why denominations fall apart. We wonder why congregations fall apart. It's quite simple. We kind of say, Lord, go out the door. We got it covered a little better than you do. Now, this may sound like a revelation to some, but there's way too much people-pleasing and not enough God-pleasing. But in our attempt to please God, a lot of times it's unpopular, isn't it? You'll be unpopular at work, you'll be unpopular, at the school, you probably might even be unpopular at church. It's like, bring up God's will. That's sometimes that's, what are you bringing that up for? This is church. But we have to keep in mind that when we make those pledges, when we come to Christ, one of our baptismal vows is, Lord, we'll follow you. We'll follow you to the end. Like I say, quite often there's too much people pleasing and not enough God pleasing. We do it a number of ways, the people pleasing. It could be by the length of the service. Not going to be on time, by the way. But we figure that if we keep it at a certain time, we're going to keep people happy, and that's going to keep them coming here. And we fail to ask the operative question. How much does the Lord want us here? How much of our attention does the Lord want? You follow what I'm talking about? Or what kind of music's playing? We do that, and we sometimes forget, what does the Lord want to hear? What's he about? What are his wishes? how we spend our money, or what we're doing with different ideas. So why do we resist taking Jesus' side? What's that inherent part? I think part of it's tied up in our relationship, that intimate relationship where we're not quite sure where we stand with Him. So if we're not sure where we stand with Him, it's like, ooh, I better cover my bases just in case this God thing doesn't work out. I better have a safety net over here to, just in case. So I think part of it's the fear of man, but really this is nothing new. If we read in Luke 6, Jesus talks about this. He's got the Sermon on the Plain, I guess it is. And he talks about the blessed are you, but then he gives a few sentences where he talks about some woes. We don't like to read this one because this one makes us feel really uncomfortable. And it's Luke 6, 23 through 26. And he says, rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven. For that is how their fathers treated the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you've already received your comfort. Woe to you who are well fed, for you will go hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. But this is the sentence I'd like you to pay attention to. He says, woe to you when all men speak of you, speak well of you. He says, for that is how their fathers treated the false prophets. The false prophets were spoken well of. They were welcomed in with open arms. It's like, oh, we love what you're hearing to say. I think that's just part of our default. We want to hear what our ears are itching to hear. So what I'd like us to think about as we go on today and we move about our business and we reconvene tonight is I want us to consider Jesus' example. He didn't deviate from what he said and where he stood, even though it took him to the cross. Because he knew he had to please the Father. And I know many of us don't like to think about that, but that is exactly what we were called to when we cried out in mercy to him, was to follow him, even if it's unpopular, even if it seems like downright lunacy. That was our pledge in our moment of need. In the time when we came, we realized there is no hope without him. That's one of the promises we made. That I'll follow you. I'll obey you. No matter what befalls me. So as I said, you see in Jesus, we see an example where pleasing the Father alone was all he needed. He didn't need the approval from any man or any woman. And I'd like us to consider, are we thinking about pleasing the Father, that that's what we need primarily, and that's all we need? Because when we all function that way and we seek what he wants, that's what brings us together. That's what brings us healing and wholeness. So the question this morning for me and for us, I believe, is pleasing God enough for us? Is pleasing God alone enough for us? Let us pray. Lord, forgive us when we stray from your commands. Forgive us when we don't seek you. And forget that it's you who we called out to in our moment of need. Forgive us for fearing men and women when we know it's you we should fear. We ask you to put upon our hearts this morning a rekindled desire to follow you. That is you who we are to please. And also that following you may bring us a bumpy road, a perilous path, but you told us that was part of the walk. So we just ask you to put upon our heart the importance and the necessity, but the safety and the life that comes from following you. We ask you to hear our prayers. We ask all this in your precious name. Amen. And will the ushers please receive the offering?